for his line of questioning, and it's good to see the gentleman. I'd now like to go to the distinguished gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Burlison. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Brown, I think it's been said before, we know that in 2023 alone, there's been 236 billion that's of improper payments. Do we have any idea about what happened during the COVID era, how much in total? That may be a question for Mr. Horowitz.
We actually don't have a number for the pandemic at this point, although SBA IG and Labor IG alone have recommended a combined $300 billion plus in fraud. We're still pursuing. We alone are involved in about 900 cases involving 22,000 subjects. The amount of fraud was enormous. Could have been prevented, by the way, and that's what love to chat further about.
Yeah.
But we're not going to know the final number for several more years. The hardest part to get our arms around, as was mentioned before, is the foreign international wrongdoing, because it takes so much work to follow money that's left the country and fraudsters that have left the country.
So it was said that we need to pass. There's legislation that would need to be passed in order to help this. Mrs. Miller, I think you referenced that. What is included in that legislation that would give the agencies the tools that they need?
Well, there's a lot of different legislative solutions that probably need to be considered. I mean, certainly I think codifying the PACE feels like a no-brainer to me because it's an amazing centralized tool, as Mr. Horowitz has been talking about. Allowing Treasury to have more access to more data sets will help as well, because as Mr. Horowitz is talking about, the PACE and the PRAC are in the oversight community, and there is an independence line between the management side of government and the oversight side of government. And so Treasury also needs additional tools, and they need additional authorities, and they need additional data sets. It takes up to 2 years to get a new data set implemented into Do Not Pay right now. Because of the way it's set up, OMB has to go through a lengthy process to approve the use of a data set to be used in Do Not Pay. So some of this stuff is sort of low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. There's some legislative fixes that could really improve access to data very quickly for Treasury, as well as codifying the PACE. And then I think really what needs to happen is we need to start investing in some return on investment analytics activities at high-risk programs. I also, while you're asking, I kind of think we need to jettison the regime at the moment that just encourages paper pushing right now. There are many agencies that engage in improper payments reporting for the sake of reporting, and they're very low-risk programs. The CRS has estimated that up to...
Sorry, can you break that down for me a little bit?
Yeah.
So you're saying the low-risk programs. Give me an example.
So, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, maybe that would be one of the programs. So the Congressional Research Service has done studies that have found that up to 95% of all improper payments in the government are centered on those high priority programs that are reporting to paymentaccuracy.gov. It's about 30 programs. It's about 95%. So we're talking about risk. Ms. Williams mentioned the importance of the GAO fraud risk management framework. I led the development of that framework 10 years ago. Risk is important here, and we have to think about this problem in the context of risk. It doesn't make sense to be telling an agency with a budget, that's a couple of $1 million to spend a lot of money and time considering how much improper payments they have. We ought to be focused on the big programs, and we ought to be making those programs do data-driven, outcome-oriented activities, and we ought to be asking them to demonstrate that they're reducing their fraud and improper payments.
Is it possible that some of the data that they're needing access to, that even a program that's like a smaller program like that they could have, I don't know, an interface or some kind of ability to quickly query these other data sets so that they don't...
That in an ideal world, we would have a centralized capability. And I mean, honestly, the PACE is a great example. And again, it's in the law enforcement side of government. And so a challenge for you guys, but you guys are the ones that can solve this challenge, is a way to get the management side of government access to some of that data as well. Because there are things like the OIG Empowerment Act that give IGs access to data that the management side of government does not have.
And it could be done, we have little time, but it could be done in such a way where you're not creating more exposure risk, right? Because, I mean, just the other day I got an FSA letter saying that my personal information has been compromised. But we could do this in a way where there's no additional exposure for the data.
Yeah,
right?
there's a lot of technological advancement in hashing and being able to mask the identities, the personally identifiable information. And so this privacy issue, the tension between privacy advocates and the use of data for fraud prevention is a real tension in the policy space. Mr. Horowitz.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's a very important question, and one that we've been very mindful of, and I've been very mindful of. If I could have a minute to just talk about what we've done to make sure how this can be done in a safe and secure way. Our data analysts took 33 million applications from SBA's PPP and EIDL programs. They identified about 2.7 million of those 33 million using advanced data analytics that we have for potential anomalies, suspicious numbers potentially. Doesn't mean they were potential. We spent, as I mentioned earlier, about 8 months or so getting an agreement in place with Social Security Administration. What we did was we took the name, date of birth, and Social Security number and sent it to SSA, Social Security Administration. We didn't want any of their data for the privacy issues and all. We sent the applicant information to them and said, answer 3 questions.
Yeah.
Is it a real number? Yes or no? And if it is a real number, do those 3 indicators match your 3, name, date of birth, social? Mm-hmm. And finally, living or dead. We got back over 200,000 hits that didn't answer all 3 questions the right way. Of those, 69,000 got $5.4 billion. Okay? It took Social Security Administration less than 2 weeks to answer the 3 questions for the 2.7 million numbers. We can do this. What needs to be done is IGs and their agencies, and this is what has to happen going forward in the prevention space. We can enter into an agreement, and I've talked about this with GAO and Jean Dodaro, and we're in agreement. It doesn't impair our independence. We enter into an agreement with agencies where they can send us applicant information to run against our database and use. I have over 100 agreements with agencies now where I can send them data and they can give me verification information, for example. And we've used those tools to verify. It doesn't mean someone's ineligible, but it does mean they should be essentially pulled out of line at the airport, like happens if you beep at the magnetometer,
Right.
and undergo
examined.
secondary questioning. And it can be done promptly. It's a false choice if people say, oh, it'll take months and months and months to figure this out. The data's sitting there. We've done the hard work over 4 years to get those agreements in place. It can be done quickly, and the committee shouldn't accept people's explanations that, oh, it'll take too long.
Well, sorry if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll just make a comment. Is that the problem is that it's causing impact to everyone, right? So you've got legitimate claimants who are being delayed. Sometimes they're being accused of committing, or being lumped into the fraudsters. And at the end of the day, we just need to make the system more efficient.
If I can just say, we had hearings on this. We heard from, to your point, Congressman, in the unemployment space, we heard from about examples where unemployed individuals were second, the fraudsters beat them in, and they didn't get their payments initially because a fraudster beat them to it first. And they had to get help to convince the agency that they weren't the fraudster or an improper payee. And of course, the people who need unemployment insurance probably don't have a lot of money to get the support they need to do that. So that's the reality of what's happening.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I want to add one point because I think just another illustration. Similar to the example that Mr. Horowitz shared about sending the files to the Social Security Administration, GAO took much of that same information and ran it against the National New Hire Database, and we found millions of questionable loans. And we referred that information to the SBAIG. So it's just another illustration of if all of the available data sets are together and an application or a potential claimant can be run through all of those databases, then you really get the best information because you're able to cross-check across all of them and identify and refine questionable payments before they're paid out. And it goes back to prevention being key. Thank you.